I'm Tasha Halevi, and this is Footprint Radio. Buildings are the largest producers of greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for nearly 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S., more than both transportation and industry. U.S. annual energy consumption is projected to increase 37% by 2020. How do we look to building standards and programs to lay the groundwork for design and construction that reduces greenhouse gas emissions? One of our guests today is Kevin Afflerbaugh. Kevin is the lead business sustainability coordinator for the City of Boulder's Climate Smart program, and will discuss some of the programs created under Climate Smart that are becoming a model for other cities and even our federal government. And later, BGBG member Laura Hutchings will share the green tip for how companies like hers can take steps to meet the 2030 challenge. But first, what is the 2030 challenge? Greg Mella will join us today to talk about AIA's 2030 commitment and 2030 challenge. Greg is a principal at the Smith Group, where he has worked on many LEED projects, including the first ever certified LEED Platinum project. Greg has testified before the DOE and AIA and has lectured on sustainable design at many universities, as well as EcoBuild, Labs 21 National Conference, University Planning National Conference, and Greenbuild. Greg speaks to us as a member of AIA's 2009 Committee on the Environment Advisory Group, where he has contributed to the implementation of AIA's 2030 commitment. This is the Boulder Green Building Guild's Footprint Radio on KGNU Boulder, KGNU Denver. Greg, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
In the building industry, 2030 is a date that has become synonymous with sustainability, but what does 2030 really mean?
The 2030 origins really kind of come from the scientific community looking at global warming and looking at the tipping point. I mean, we know man's actions have already resulted in global warming. I guess the question is, have we gone too far, or are we starting to reach a dangerous level with climate change? And we're really trying to keep global warming under 2 degrees Celsius before we start seeing some kind of catastrophic climate results. In order to prevent that 2 degrees increase from happening, we need to reduce our carbon emissions significantly. And buildings are the largest source of carbon emissions, certainly in the world and definitely in the United States. So the 2030 challenge came out as a result, looking at a goal we need to set for new and renovated buildings, getting those towards carbon neutral by the year 2030. So in some ways, the term 2030 is synonymous with sustainability, although I should say sustainability isn't only focused in climate change. Climate change is a critical issue, but certainly water resources and human health and site conservation are also important issues.
So the 2030 challenge doesn't address the built environment, but it really focuses in on the energy consumption and carbon emissions from the building industry.
Exactly. Recognizing that in the United States, 75% of all the electricity used is associated with buildings. The issue there is that over 50% of that electricity is generated by burning coal, the largest producer of carbon dioxide. The whole 2030 challenge begins with a kind of a fundamental understanding that, architects are sort of the culprit, one of the culprits to climate change, and we have a great responsibility to be part of the solution. So the 2030 commitment program is sort of holding your feet to the fire. What are we going to do as a profession to minimize the impacts of the buildings we design?
So let's talk about that responsibility of the architect and what the 2030 commitment has done to put that responsibility on the architect and the design team and the construction teams.
Well, I think you touched on it. The biggest difference between the 2030 challenge and the 2030 commitment program, because they work in harmony with each other, is that the 2030 commitment program introduces this notion of reporting. The 2030 commitment program is now asking for firms to actually measure the energy use of all of the buildings within a design firm. And that's the difference between the challenge and the commitment program. I should say that the 2030 commitment and the 2030 challenge recognize that we're not going to be able to get to carbon neutral buildings by 2030 overnight. It's just like the challenges of trying to quit smoking cold turkey. This is sort of a tapered approach. So by the year 2010, we need to reduce it by 60%. By 2015, 70%, 2020, 80%. So a kind of a tapered stepped approach so that by the time we get to 2030, we're designing carbon neutral buildings.
How do architecture firms report this progress, and what are the metrics that they're using to report their progress from here on out until 2030?
Well, the fundamental foundation of the 2030 challenge, when you say we're going to design buildings that use 60% less energy, I guess the first question is less energy than what? And the benchmark that both the 2030 challenge and the 2030 commitment program use is 60% less than a typical building in the United States. And the Department of Energy produces a database, the CBEX database, Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey. And those energy uses of buildings become the metric that we're comparing against. It's a topic called energy use intensity, or EUI. So, for instance, an office building in the United States typically consumes 100 kBTU of energy per square foot of office annually. So if we were designing an office building for the year 2010, our goal would be to only consume 40 kBTU per square foot per year, 60% less than a typical office building. We're working with the New Building Institute to create a tool that architects can use to really track this.
How does this EUI metric and this new tool work with existing metrics such as Target Finder or ASHRAE 90.1 or a LEED standard?
Well, it's a good point because there are all these different metrics out there, and it does get a little confusing. The Target Finder does reference the CBEX database. So a building that uses the Target Finder to find its EUI goal, that's effectively the same way as looking at the CBEX database. Now, the challenge is that an ASHRAE 90.1, that is a very contemporary current energy code. A building that is designed to comply with ASHRAE 90.1 is already performing a lot better than just your average building in the United States. And the New Building Institute is helping us understand what the relationship is between ASHRAE 90.1 and between the CBEX database. In reality, if you did a cross-section of firms in the United States, you may find that a lot of the projects that firms are designing, they've never done an energy model on. So they really have no sense of understanding what the energy use intensity is. So it's some way of kind of bridging the gap. If you don't know what your energy use is, and you really have no way of seeing if a project is complying with the 2030 threshold.
Energy modeling is definitely key to understanding how buildings are performing. It seems moving from, say, 20% energy savings to 50% energy savings is one hurdle to get over, but the closer we get to approaching a carbon neutral or 100% energy savings, the more difficult it is. So as we move closer towards the upper limit of achieving the 2030 challenge, what types of challenges will design and construction teams face?
Well, yeah, and that's something that I can't just say, well, we'll worry about that in 2025. I think that's something that we need to, as an architectural community, be prepared if we sign on to the 2030 commitment program. It not only means that we're designing our buildings now to be 60% less energy, but that we have a plan for getting to these higher thresholds that will approach as we get closer to 2030. I'm finding that with really strong architectural design, where you're starting to think about your energy use early in the design process and you're looking at passive approaches to reduce your building loads, that can get you a good chunk, maybe 35% better than a typical building. And again, I should say that doesn't necessarily cost anything more. We're talking about passive measures here, just smart design, using the right amount of insulation, orienting your buildings in the right way. And then the next hurdle is through good engineering and good active design. So now we're picking really efficient mechanical systems and looking at energy recovery and smart engineering solutions. That those approaches on top of the good passive approaches, that could probably get us about 70-75% of the way there. So I guess the big question is, how are we going to get from 75 to 100? And I think to do that, I'm finding that we are going to have to rely more and more on renewable energy sources, things like photovoltaics or wind turbines or geothermal or biomass.
Some of the strategies that you spoke about to get through those initial thresholds really seem like they rely more on integrated design than on technologies. How important do you think integrated design becomes in achieving some of these thresholds?
I think it's the most important thing to get there. The reality is very few of our clients have unlimited budgets, and the problem with relying on technology is there's usually cost associated with some of these technology. And I think there's a perception out there that green costs a lot more, and the way I tell people green doesn't cost more is through integrated design, really thinking about sustainability before you actually shape the form of the building, looking at all of the passive approaches, things you can harness from a site, and really working closely with your engineer during schematic design. I think that's the key, and you can probably get significant energy conservation without even adding a nickel. In fact, just smart design moves that don't increase the first cost and will save your clients a lot of money in operational energy over the life of the building.
Let's talk about where we are today. 2010 marks the first big threshold for the 2030 challenge, and that's to reduce fossil fuel consumption by 60%. Do the current reporting trends show that the firms that are registered with the 2030 commitment are on track to meet the 2010 goal by the end of this year?
I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say the answer to your question is going to be no. I don't think firms are there yet. Certainly not all firms. We're looking at all of a firm's projects, whether the client is asking for green or not. And that's the challenge. Again, a lot of firms really aren't even doing energy modeling for all of their projects. So it's really hard to say your project's 60% better than an average building if you've never really modeled it. So I think the first year of the commitment program, we're probably going to find firms aren't at the 60% target yet. And I think that's okay, because I think the first step in improving your broad portfolio's energy performance is to track it. And I think the exercise, with the exception of a small number of firms, it's going to be the first time firms are actually tracking the energy use of their entire portfolio of work. And that's a huge step forward.
Being committed to the 2030 challenge puts the architect and the design team in the responsible seat for energy savings, but how do we ultimately shift the responsibility to the building users?
Yeah, that's a good question, because as much as I'm an architect and I'd like to think we're controlling everything, and it's a little bit unrealistic. And I think the question alludes to the reality that we often find that there is a discrepancy between the energy use we predicted the building would consume and the actual energy use. And often that difference is largely the result of the fact that the users are using the building maybe differently than what we thought. The best green decisions are the ones that are sort of seamless and that really take into account the way users operate a building. I think the other reality, too, is that the average person in the United States, they don't really pay the real price for energy. That the price for a kilowatt of electricity doesn't take into account the cost of the carbon dioxide that gets emitted into the atmosphere. I think if we, as a society, started to pay the real price of energy, I think people will think twice before they waste energy. Certainly, any carbon legislation, cap-and-trade carbon tax, is a means for having the United States society actually pay closer to the actual price of the energy use that they consume.
Sounds like we need a paradigm shift in a lot of sectors.
That's right. There's only so much we can do as architects.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Great. It was my pleasure. It was fun talking to you.
As we've discussed, meeting the thresholds to reduce carbon emissions requires more than just commitment from design and construction teams. We are also dependent on commitment of local governments to make it more feasible to achieve goals such as 2030. Our next guest, Kevin Afflerbaugh, will discuss the City of Boulder's Climate Smart programs, some of which have been cited as a model at a municipal, federal, and even international level. I asked Kevin about the history of Climate Smart.
We really have to go way back to 2002. And there, the mayor of Seattle was launching a program called the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, where he was asking mayors from municipalities across the U.S. to sign this agreement, which he would ask them to help their municipalities achieve the goals of the Kyoto Protocol. And this movement kind of came around because the federal government wasn't taking action to meet the Kyoto Protocol, and so they thought that a local action was where you could really achieve significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, which would help the climate change issue. So in 2002, the City of Boulder signed this agreement, and the City of Boulder really worked over the next 4 years to develop a climate action plan. And this climate action plan really detailed the steps that the city would take to help reduce its carbon emissions and meet the goals of the Kyoto Protocol. This kind of culminated in 2006, where the City of Boulder asked the voters to pass the climate action plan tax, which would basically help fund our climate action plan programs. And the City of Boulder voters passed this tax, and that provided the funding that has allowed the city to implement a number of programs, all branded under the Climate Smart brand, to help the city achieve the goals of the Kyoto Protocol.
The Climate Smart program is an umbrella to many individual programs. Can you speak to what some of those programs are and how they work?
The programs that came out of the CAP were really focused on education. And so this was education for both residential and the commercial sector. On the residential sector and the commercial sector, we provided energy audits, which really kind of helped businesses and residents understand where their energy was being used and what steps they could take to help reduce their energy. And that was really kind of the key component. We're still have a long way to go to achieve the goal. And so it's really important for our programs to drive implementation. And so over the recent future, we've really been thinking about programs that can help achieve implementation. So going beyond those steps in the audit and having the homeowner or the business implement those changes. And then there's also the Climate Smart Loan Program, which is a great way for both residential and now the commercial sector to take a loan to help implement some of these more expensive measures that will achieve great energy savings for both their homes and businesses.
One of the components that you just mentioned was the Climate Smart loan, and that's part of the recent history of the Climate Smart program. And this is no longer just a city effort, but also a county effort. So can you speak to the background of how this program started and how this Climate Smart loan is moving forward?
Climate Smart has been embraced throughout the county, and the Climate Smart brand and programs are being launched throughout the county. It's not just the City of Boulder program or name or effort anymore. It's the countywide activities are happening, programs are happening to help businesses and homeowners reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And so the Climate Smart loan program came out of that. The county launched an effort to really think of a new way to finance some of the energy efficiency improvements. And that's always been some of the challenge of making these energy efficiency improvements, is because you need upfront capital to make the changes. So the Climate Smart loan program was developed by the county as a way for individuals to pay for the measures by taking a loan basically through their property taxes. And it's an additional assessment on their property taxes, and it gets paid through their property taxes. And basically what is a great benefit of the Climate Smart loan is that it stays with the property. One of the challenges of encouraging people to make energy efficiency improvements that may take a long time to pay back, such as new windows or renewable energies, is that they do take a long time to pay back, and they're concerned that they may not be in their house for that whole time. Well, the benefit of the Climate Smart loan program is that you take out that loan and it stays with that house. It's really been a great model to help people get the capital to make those improvements.
Where do the dollars come from for that loan?
In 2008, the voters of Boulder County authorized Boulder County to sell up to $40 million in bonds to offer these loans, which are then, as I mentioned, paid back in their property tax assessments.
Let's speak to another component of the Climate Smart program, and that's the 10 for Change program.
Yes, the 10 for Change program is a great program that is basically a challenge to the business community to challenge businesses to reduce their energy use by 10% over a year. And what is really great about this program is that it wasn't just the city creating this program. This was a great public-private partnership. And in 2008, Hogan Hartson, a local law firm, and Cleantech Solutions, a local energy services company, came together with the city to create this program because they wanted a way to challenge the businesses in the community to really reduce their energy use and see the possibilities and the cost savings and the benefits of these energy savings. So we created this partnership and then created this program, and to date have over 60 businesses in the program. Overall, 60 businesses, we achieved a 7% energy reduction from our baseline year, which equates to about 1,300 metric tons of carbon and about $150,000 of annual energy saving.
We've already specifically spoken to the Climate Smart loan and the 10 for change, but there's also a new term that's been thrown around, and that's the 2 techs and a truck.
It's kind of this model that's been tossed about, and it's really a way that we're looking at to achieve more implementation. The 2 techs in a truck model is basically kind of where we could come to your home or your business, provide an energy analysis to show you what potentially you could implement, and then at the same time make those changes, those energy efficiency improvements that you see fit.
The overall Climate Smart program has many components that have been cited as a model, both for other municipalities and also at a federal level. So can you speak to how this program or components of this program act as a model to other communities?
Yeah, I think when we first passed the Climate Action Plan tax, we got calls from across the world about how that worked and how it could, how other cities or state governments even could implement something like a Climate Action Plan tax. Our Climate Action Plan was one of the first across the nation, and we got lots of response for that. It's been great to see other cities and governments sharing what we're doing. Being on the cutting edge has really allowed us to be creative and come up with a lot of brand new programs. So it's been a great opportunity to be able to share what we're doing.
Many companies are registered to meet the 2030 challenge, but how are they doing it? BGBG member Laura Hutchings of Populous Sustainable Design Consulting presents this week's Green Tip.
Populous Sustainable Design Consulting is an adopter of the Architecture 2030 Challenge. Populous implements the challenge by performing energy analysis that helps our clients design and construct buildings that achieve above-code energy performance. How do you know if the home you are designing meets the 2030 energy targets? For residential projects, the Home Energy Rating System, or HERS Index, can estimate how your home performs compared to a home built to code. Just as miles per gallon is the measure of your car's efficiency, a HERS Index is a measure of your home's efficiency. Want to know how those solar panels will shrink your carbon footprint? Interested in whether high-performance windows will pay for themselves in energy savings? Working with a home energy rater can help you answer those questions and can help you increase the energy efficiency of your designs within a budget, even while your project is still a pile of plans. To learn more about home energy rating, visit the new home industry section on EnergyStar.gov. This is the BGBG Green Tip. I'm Laura Hutchings.
Thank you for joining us today on KGNU Boulder, KGNU Denver, with Boulder Green Building Guild's Footprint Radio. You can podcast this show and learn more about the BGBG by going to bgbg.org or searching Footprint Radio on iTunes. To share your green tip on the air, submit your ideas with our online forum on the Footprint Radio tab at bgbg.org. Thank you to our sponsors at the Boulder County Business Report, the City of Boulder, and Solar Glass Window and Door for taking a step towards greener footprints. I'm Tasha Halevi. This is Footprint Radio.